Peak week. So do you want to know how to peak correctly for your contest or photo shoot or wedding or whatever it is you're trying to peak for? Stay tuned and I'll give you my opinion on how to do that. All right, so thanks everyone for watching. John Meadows here. And a very common question that I get is around peak week. And generally it comes from people who compete in some kind of physique competitions. This is a really interesting question. I've competed over 60 times. I'd be lying to you if I told you I wasn't looking for the magic peak week protocol myself. I've searched the internet high and low trying to find the special magic that's supposedly out there. But after competing for over 30 years and coaching many pros and just many competitors, my opinion is that peak week is largely hogwash. And I think so. I want to talk about this in stages. So stage number one, the first thing if you want to peak correctly is you have to be fat free. So you have to be very lean. You have to be in contest condition. If you're not in contest condition, you can do all the manipulations you want with water and sodium. Those things don't magically rid your body of fat though. So when you're on stage or wherever, or a photo shoot, you can't just magically, well I guess you could with Photoshop if you're doing a photo shoot, but you can't just magically make your fat disappear by using a peaking strategy. So first of all, the first thing you have to do is you have to be in shape. Now what I generally have people do is I try to target 2 weeks out as being the time to be in shape. So what does in shape mean? What's a little different, for a girl competing in figure versus a girl competing in physique or versus a male competing in high level bodybuilding. It could be a little different. But generally you want your body fat low enough to show all the separation and detail in your muscles. You just don't want to see body fat. And if you're in the higher levels of competition that require even more leanness, then you're looking for things like striations and all kinds of deep separation, just things that are very, very hard to get. You got to work really hard to get that lean. So the first thing you have to focus on is simply getting lean. I wish there was a more exciting answer than that, but that's number one. Now, number two, what about water? So what I like to do with people is I like to steady their water intake starting on Monday. So if I have a competitor that is competing on Saturday, on Monday I'll tell them to drink 4 liters of water or 5 liters of water or 6 liters of water, whatever that number is. I'll tell them to drink that exact amount every single day. Here's why I do that. Because when you have the exact amount in their body every single day, then when it comes Friday, the night before the show, you can then raise the water or you can lower the water and you can more accurately predict what the result is going to be. If Monday they drank 5 liters, Tuesday they drank 4, Wednesday they drank 6, Thursday they drank 2, changing their water it's very unpredictable. It might make them look flat. It might make them look really good. You just don't know. So I like to control that variable. So water, you steady it. And then based on what you're seeing, if they look a little watery, then you can pull the 5 liters back to 4. If they look a little flat, you can increase the water from 4 to 5 or 5 to 6 or 3 to 4. But my point is you have to get consistency. Now what about minerals? What about sodium and potassium is what everybody talks about. Now, if the concern with sodium is water retention. So a lot of people pull sodium out of their diet. This can give you a little drier appearance, but what happens most of the time is they also reduce their water, and then in some case they also add on diuretics on top of it. And the result is a very, very flat muscle. And it actually looks softer. People will actually say you weren't lean enough. And a lot of times the person was actually lean enough, they just didn't have any what you call pop to their muscle. A full muscle will actually press against the skin and actually show more detail. So you want a full muscle. So what I do is whatever somebody has been doing with their sodium, I typically don't change it. I tell them to keep it where it's at. Keep it steady. Starting on Monday, whatever you've been doing, keep it steady all the way through the show. If it's a situation where they're really, really flat, maybe stress gets to them or they have a really stressful maybe traveling to the contest, it's really stressful. Maybe some of my friends have gotten stuck on the tarmac in an airplane and sweat for hours, and those things happen. But you can add a little bit of sodium back in with the water and fill their muscle right back out. But generally speaking, I keep their sodium level. The same thing goes with potassium. I don't do any special potassium supplementation. Some people think that you need that because you also need to take diuretics. Some diuretics do not spare potassium. So people say, well, I can fix it if I just add potassium. This is one of the things I tried in my early 20s. We used to have this prescription potassium called Slow K. And what we did back then was we actually took Lasix, very, very powerful diuretic, and it would dry you up. And then we were afraid of having a potassium deficiency, so we would take this Slow K medicine on top of it to make sure we had potassium in our body. Very unpredictable. Generally you would just get a headache from it because you got too dehydrated, and your muscles, how for those of you who have competed, how you're backstage and you're trying to pump up and you just can't even feel anything? Well, that's just because you're probably too dehydrated. You can't pump up a dehydrated muscle. A muscle is, 50, 60% water. So if you drain all the water out of it and you deplete it of minerals, there's no way it can pump up. So I tend to leave people's potassium the same also. Okay, so what about carbohydrate loading and depleting? Another very common tactic. And what I like to do is once somebody's in shape, I like to slowly increase their carbs during the week. I prefer to increase it starting on Monday or Tuesday, but do gradual increases. I keep it going up and up and up and up and up. And if we get to a point where it's too much and they spill over a little or they look a little watery, then you can make a very simple adjustment. You can pull back on the carbs a little, or you could pull back on their water, maybe 20%, maybe take that 5 liters to 4. And 9 times out of 10, that fixes the problem. So it's a very gradual load. Now, a lot of people like to deplete. My opinion is this. When you've been dieting really hard, and especially to get at a really low body fat percentage, guess what? You've already been depleting. You've been depleting for 3 weeks or 6 weeks or 8 weeks. You're already depleted 9 times out of 10. So it doesn't make sense to really do these hard depletions to me. The theory is supercompensation. The theory is, if I deplete them of carbohydrates and then I can pump a lot more carbohydrates in them, and then all of a sudden they'll look crazy. Yeah, they might look a little bit better, but just because it works for long distance runners doesn't mean it works for bodybuilders. I would rather gradually increase their carbohydrates and watch their body and see how it's reacting. Usually what happens is they'll tighten up, they'll stay tight. Okay? So, and the other thing is, people with a lot of muscle tend to have a hard time getting out of depletions. And I think this is one of the reasons why I tend to do really well with the bigger competitors, because I don't deplete them, because I know that when you deplete someone who's real big, who's already been depleting, now if you push them even harder, it takes days for them to come out of their depletion. It's not a matter of eating 2,000 calories a day before. It takes a couple of days before they regain that look. I've experienced this many, many times myself as well. We used to increase our cardio and drop our carbs down to 0 really, and just really deplete hard. And when I did that, I don't recall, maybe 1 time, maybe 2 times where I could come out of it and looked really good. Most of the time, I didn't look good. You can gain your weight back, but there's a look that is missing from your muscles that takes time to come back. It doesn't usually happen overnight. And this is one of the challenging things that I faced in the 212 class when I was competing in that class. Was it required me to do a really hard depletion, specifically water, in order to make that weight. So in order to get that look back, it was very, very challenging, especially when I only had 12 hours to do it. So I got a lot of experience dealing with that challenge. But anyway, so I don't deplete. I don't believe in really hard depletions. If you have a situation where somebody is behind and there's too much fat on their body, then you probably should get more aggressive to try to get the fat off of them. But if you followed my direction, then they should be lean and fat-free at 2 weeks out, so this won't be a problem. What about the day of the show? Well, let me talk about before that, the night before the show. What do I have people do the night before the show? What I like to have people do, and I had just about every competitor I worked with last year did this. I like to have them actually do a pump workout. So it's not so hard that it's damaging their muscle. That just creates inflammation and can potentially create some water retention, which would blur the lines in the muscle. So what I like to do is I like to have them do a pump workout, generally just for their upper body, where they just do about 6 sets of body part. And what I want them to feel is their muscle actually pumping up. This is good. This is a very good sign. It means that you're not too depleted. You're delivering glucose into the muscle. You're hydrated enough. And it's also, that in itself is also really good to help you make decisions, because I'll give you an example. I was competing in North Carolina last year at a 212 show, and I kept doing set after set after set. I couldn't get a pump. So I just kept drinking water, and I literally had to drink 2 liters of water before I felt any pump at all. But that's what it took. And once I felt, okay, now the blood's in there, everything's hydrated, then I knew I was good. Then I was transporting nutrients. I wasn't too dehydrated. So it's also a good thing to kind of anecdotally tell you where you're at with your body. If you go in there, you do a few sets and you start pumping up, that's good. That's great. That means everything's just right. Now, the next day, you basically do the same thing. It's just not as much of it. So when you're backstage and you're wanting to pump up, you just do like a little pump workout, just like you did the night before. Maybe not as many sets, but again, since we're not completely cutting water, since we're not using diuretics, this will enable you to get a nice full pump. The fuller the pump is that you get, the more muscle detail that you'll be able to see, because your skin will be stretched tighter. And a deflated muscle is a soft muscle. A full muscle is a hard muscle. Remember that. Beat that into your head. A flat muscle is a soft muscle. A full muscle is a hard-looking muscle. So it's a very basic approach. What I would say is that if you really look at competitors, most of them look better the week before the show or the week after the show. And the reason why is they did what I've done in the past. We've probably all done it as competitors. We looked for the magic peak week formula. But to me, the magic peak week formula is being in shape early, slowly adding a little bit of carbs during the week, keeping your water steady, making slight manipulations on Friday. That's my very simple, not so complex solution to peaking. I've been able to use that approach and have many pros win shows. And I don't use diuretics with people anymore. There's just too much risk involved. And a lot of people say, well, you just gotta have to know how to use them right. Well, you can't accurately predict where the water is going to come from. You can't just say, I have a formula where I can pull water out from under the skin and put it in the muscle. You can't accurately predict that on everybody. Or people say, well, it's potassium sparing, so the muscle won't lose any fullness. Like Diazide, for example. Again, an extremely strong diuretic for some people. And it may spare potassium, but they still end up peeing a lot and being flat. So I'm not real big on diuretics, and I'm going to close with one more story. You know, I love to tell stories. So I grew up in an era where everybody thought you should use diuretics. I've used probably every diuretic you can use. And I did a show in 2004, a long time ago, obviously. And my coach thought I looked really good, and he essentially asked for my diuretics to look at them, and then I handed them to him. He turned around, he walked into the bathroom, and he flushed them down the toilet. He said, I'm not going to let you ruin this. So I was very nervous, very nervous. That was one of the first times I'd competed as an adult and not used diuretics. I think it might have been the first, actually. And I did really well at the show. I felt great the next day. I had a real good pump. Everything was real detailed on stage. It's the first ever Mr. North America I did. I made the top 5. And that was the lesson for me. It was like, wow, I don't need that. All the stuff I'd been hearing about you need it, I didn't really need it. So sometimes that's what it takes for those of us who've had this stuff beat into your head that you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to deplete, you have to cut all your water. Just because everybody's saying that, don't buy the hype, okay? Don't buy into it. You don't need to. So I just wanted to share that with you. I hope this is interesting and helpful. If you have any more questions about peak week, feel free to comment below, and I'll do the best I can to answer all your questions. Thank you very much for watching.